Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Lori Johnson.
And I'm George Thomas. People in Australia are still in shock after a deadly terror hostage situation in Sydney, leaving many there to wonder about the safety of their country. It was a nearly 17-hour ordeal that ended with gunfire and explosions, which led to the death of the gunman and at least 2 other people. Take a listen to the stun grenades and gunfire that seemed to go on and on. The terrorist held dozens of people hostage for hours. A few had escaped throughout the ordeal. Those who hadn't managed to get away earlier ran from the cafe during the raid, and at least 2 were eventually carried out on stretchers. The gunman was identified as Man Haroon Moniz, seen here in video from a former court appearance. The Iranian-born man was a self-proclaimed Islamic sheikh and an alleged sexual predator. He'd been accused of dozens of counts of sexual assault and the brutal murder of an ex-wife. It all started when Moniz stormed into a Sydney cafe at the height of the morning rush hour.
He was very calm. He was just pacing.
Minutes after storming the restaurant, Moniz, who also had suspected ties to ISIS, forced customers to hoist 2 black flags with the Arabic saying, "There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah."
This is a very disturbing incident. It is profoundly shocking that innocent people should be held hostage by an armed person claiming political motivation.
The siege comes just months after Australian police launched the biggest counter-terrorism raids in that nation's history, after getting information that Islamic terrorists were plotting to conduct public beheadings. The threat from homegrown Islamic radicals is a big concern after 90 Australians traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight alongside ISIS and other terrorist groups. One other item. Meanwhile, in southern France, authorities today dismantled an ISIS terror network. French police raided dozens of locations where jihadists were reportedly preparing to send fighters to Syria. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe, by the way, and in recent years, hundreds of its citizens have fought with terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq and have called for attacks on their homeland.
Ex-CIA interrogation chief Jose Rodriguez says the Senate Intelligence Committee's report throws the CIA under the bus. He says it could create many problems for agents in the future. Senator John McCain, a former Vietnam prisoner of war, defended the report, but says he understands why the tactics were used.
I make of it a whole range of motives from people who were so understandably alarmed and angered by the attacks of 9/11 that their first motivation is do whatever's necessary to make sure there's never again a repetition and some revenge there. Obviously, all of us felt that.
McCain went on to say what we need to do now is come clean, move forward, and vow not to do it again.
Iraqi Christians who fled villages near Mosul this summer are still living away from their homes. They joined more than 1 million other Iraqis who fled for Kurdistan after Islamic State fighters overran their neighborhoods. The question is, will the Peshmerga act soon to liberate Iraq's second largest city from ISIS?
This is the Iraqi government's responsibility. This is the Sunnis' responsibility in and around Mosul. To what extent they will be ready to do that, we will support any offensive if there will be a comprehensive strategy to drive ISIS out of Mosul. But to say that the Kurdish Peshmergas to do it alone, without the support of the Sunnis, without the full participation of the Iraqi federal government, it will turn to be a Kurdish-Arabic war that we don't want to have happen.
Our senior international correspondent Gary Lane is actually in the region. For more on the story, log on to cbnnews.com and read his latest blog on the Entry Global Lane.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Rome to meet with Secretary of State John Kerry and European leaders. He'll push back against a French plan that would divide Israel and the West Bank into 2 states based on 1967 borders. The French are trying to go through the UN Security Council over Israel's objections. The action might cause the U.S. to veto the resolution. Before he left Israel, Netanyahu warned his nation would not allow terrorist entities on its doorstep. He said, "We will stand firm in the face of any diktat or orders from Europe."
Political unrest and anti-Semitism around the world are driving many Jews from their home countries. Surprisingly, many are finding refuge in what much of the world might see as a dangerous place, Israel. As Chris Mitchell reports, the number of immigrants entering the country is at a 5-year high.
When 19-year-old Alexandrina Zolodev saw her family safely on the ground in Israel, she couldn't stop crying.
When I saw them, I cried a lot. My mom cried too. It's really a happy day, but we're crying a lot.
Alexandrina immigrated here last year when Ukraine was still relatively quiet. Then the fighting began, catching her family in the middle of it.
When I lost contact with them, I was very worried because I didn't know what happened there. They called later and my dad told me that every day they were sleeping in the cellar.
Nearly 25,000 Jewish people immigrated to Israel since the Rosh Hashanah holiday last year. Many of them came from war zones or places where anti-Semitism is on the rise.
For the first time, the biggest number of Jews who come to Israel is from France. We have a big increase from Russia and Ukraine.
Jewish Agency Chairman Natan Sharansky immigrated to Israel after spending years in a Soviet prison.
For me, it's especially exciting to see these families from Ukraine who are coming from the places where I grew. These places are destroyed now by the war.
He said Christians play a big role in helping Jewish immigrants connect with his agency. When they do come, many arrive with little more than the clothes on their backs.
They come here without anything, without maybe 2 suitcases, that's all, because of bombing, and Israel is the country that can help them.
Sharansky says these immigrants are fulfilling Jewish prayers and Bible prophecy, in which God promises to bring his people back to the land.
Every of these Jews is closing the circle of thousands of years, at least 50 generations of his fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers. We're praying next year in Jerusalem. And here they are this day in Jerusalem.
The Zolodev family will settle in the Israeli community of Ra'anana, and Alexandrina will soon join the IDF. Alexandrina's dad arrived on his 41st birthday and says he has hope for the future, that his dreams will be fulfilled. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv.
Good news today for people who want the cross that sits atop San Diego's Mount Soledad to remain there. It appears President Obama's signature is the only thing needed to pass a law that would keep the 4-story cross from being removed. Friday, Congress passed legislation allowing the Defense Department to sell the government land where the cross sits to a private company. Earlier, federal courts ruled that having the cross on government-owned property is an unconstitutional endorsement of religion. The cross honors America's fallen military heroes.
An ordinance that would have allowed transgender males to use women's and girls' restrooms, showers, and locker rooms in Fayetteville, Arkansas, has been overruled by voters there. It's the local law Michelle Duga campaigned against, leading gay rights activists to protest her family's show, 19 Kids and Counting. 52% of those voting said no to the ordinance. The American Family Association applauded the outcome, saying, quote, "We are encouraged to see that voters came out to voice their concerns about privacy issues, safety, religious liberties, and health of local businesses."
Coming up, want to keep your memory sharp as you get older? Well, we'll tell you why researchers say chocolate might help. Stay with us.
So welcome back to the show. So if you're hoping to prevent high blood pressure, which should you avoid more, sugar or salt?
Well, most people would probably say salt.
That is correct. Well, good guess, but new researchers show actually sugar is more to blame for hypertension. That's according to a new study published in the journal Open Heart. Researchers say the problem isn't in your sugar bowl or salt shaker at home, but rather in processed foods that contain astronomical amounts of both salt and sugar. High blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for developing heart disease, America's leading killer. An easy way to lower that blood pressure is to eat whole foods and exercise.
Well, speaking of sweets, chocolate is a favorite of people around the world. And as most people know, chocolate comes from cocoa beans. Well, researchers at Columbia University recently reported that a key ingredient in cocoa could sharpen the memories of older people. But that doesn't mean you can plan on overdosing on chocolate during the holidays. The antioxidants found in dark chocolate called cocoa flavanols, which come from cocoa beans, appear to reverse the subtle memory loss that comes with normal aging. That's according to a Columbia University study. In just 3 months, test subjects regained the memory strength of a person 25 years younger.
What we found is that 50 or 60-year-olds who consumed a high cocoa flavanol diet had an improvement in memory, and it seemed to originate from a particular part of the brain that we know is targeted by normal aging.
Unfortunately, the cocoa flavanols had no effect on a different part of the brain targeted by Alzheimer's disease. The study required participants to consume a drink containing 450 milligrams of cocoa flavanols, equaling what's in 7 dark chocolate bars. With that in mind, is it a good idea or not to eat a lot of dark chocolate every day in order to reverse the natural memory loss that comes with aging?
It is true that cocoa flavanols are found in chocolate, however, only in very small amounts. Consuming a lot of chocolate is simply bad for your health. So categorically not.
Most chocolate is high in sugar and calories. The amount of cocoa flavanols in a typical dark chocolate bar is 53 milligrams. Milk chocolate only contains 13.
But one of the things I find appealing about the study is that we're essentially suggesting that lifestyles, diet, can actually ameliorate a normal process, which I find appealing because it means we don't necessarily need a pharmaceutical agent.
The study only followed 37 people, but based on the results, Columbia plans to replicate it in a larger study.
So bitter chocolate is better for you?
That's right. The darker, the better. And the milk chocolate, it tastes better, but it's really not that good for your health. But you know, dark chocolate is also contains antioxidants, so it's good for your health in that way too. Not to mention the memory.
Good stuff. Well, still to come. A Florida World War II vet is under fire for feeding the homeless. Stick around, we'll explain why.
I reached 5 million people in a week through Facebook and Instagram.
That was the Green Power Ranger, Jason David Frank, kicking off this edition of the Digital Download. What a social media presence. And we noticed that when we posted a picture after meeting with him, thousands of likes instantly. We also posted his story online, and once again, thousands of views. So joining us now is Caleb Kinchlow to break down why this man is so successful on social media.
What's the one thing that everybody wants on social media?
We want likes, we want followers.
Likes, followers, that is why we do it. You know, and there are a few different ways to get that done. Okay. So we're gonna give you 3 quick tips on how to increase your social media presence. Step number 1, branding.
I share my life on Instagram and social media, so I started this small little YouTube thing and just sharing my life. I mean, I skydive, break a world record, my wife fights in Thailand.
So obviously, JDF has a lot to brand. How does that work for us?
Well, the first thing people have to understand is that they are a brand. Now, when I say brand, here's what I mean by that. I mean, what do people think when they see you or hear about your products? It's basically your reputation. All right, so let's look at Jason David Frank. You know, first he's an MMA fighter, and of course he's an actor, and he also runs a couple karate schools. So everything that he posts centers around that brand.
Okay. So what's the next lesson?
The next thing, the buy-in.
I'm true to the fans, and I'm true to myself, and I've been embracing it for years and years and years.
So how does the buy-in work?
All right, well, with Jason David Frank, he has what's called ambassadors. Now, these ambassadors are an extension of his brand. So basically, these people, they work for free because they believe in what he's about. You know, people don't care about what you do, they care about the why you do it. And he sold them on his message about positivity, living fearless, and things of that nature. So how does it work for us? Basically, give people a reason to follow you.
All right, what's the next lesson?
The next lesson is about building community.
Very active in social media. I feel like when there's good causes that come out or like suicide prevention stuff, like I feel like it's my job. Like I told my wife, it's like a calling to fulfill people's happiness.
Okay, so how do we build community?
So I was texting Jason the other day about what is it that he does, and he said that he spends hours at a time responding to the fans. That's the part that people seem to neglect. The work that it takes to do these things. If you're going to post something, you have to be available to respond and ask questions and find out what your viewers, what your fans want to hear.
So there we have it: branding, buy-in, and building community. So beyond that, there's also a danger to doing this wrong.
Right, of course. Ephraim, people say that any press is good press. Well, unfortunately, with social media, that actually is not the case.
We've got some examples.
Right, of course. I mean, this example is so bad. I've actually seen this in different textbooks. McDonald's and the McRib. Oh yes, the delicious sandwich, the McRib. When social media was first kind of coming out with Facebook and Twitter, they posted comments saying, hey, the McRib is back. However, they didn't have anybody to monitor those comments. So people were saying all these terrible things, and McDonald's wasn't combating, those thoughts.
So all these years later, the McRib is still around, people still eating it, they're doing it right.
Right, McDonald's is doing it right. They've started a new campaign called Our Food, Your Questions, where they're inviting viewers to ask the hard questions about all of their food.
So bottom line here, it takes time to do this right, as we heard from Jason David Frank at the very beginning. That is going to do it for this edition, everyone. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Caleb Kinchlow, and this is your Digital Download.
Some say city officials in Fort Lauderdale were acting like the Grinch by trying to stop a 90-year-old man from feeding the homeless. But he still wouldn't back down.
Yeah, and then came the uproar on social media, and a Florida judge stepped in to stop the city. David Brody introduces us to the unlikely leader at the center of this fight.
As the song goes, it's the most wonderful time of the year, a time when giving becomes the priority and hearts turn toward the needy. But in Fort Lauderdale, sharing food is a right. A Scrooge of a law has led to protests and national attention. And the man in the middle, 90-year-old Arnold Abbott, lovingly referred to as Santa Claus.
I love you, brother. Shalom.
The World War II veteran made headlines when police ticketed him not once, not twice, but 4 times for violating the city's public feeding ordinance.
I felt something on my arm. It was a hand, and the officer said, "Drop that plate right now." So I had a weapon in my hand. That was kind of funny.
Video of Abbott defying the new law went viral. When we caught up with Abbott, he was preparing to hit the streets again with a fresh batch of meals.
We don't serve the same food day after day. We serve different food. And what we want to make sure is our food is nutritious and delicious and pretty.
Abbott has spent the last 23 years feeding and educating the city's homeless.
It's a mission of love. Love is in our name. Love is what we do.
Through a nonprofit called Love Thy Neighbor, he trains the homeless for jobs in the food business. For Abbott, it's not only a heart of compassion that motivates him, it's honoring the legacy of his late wife, who also dedicated her life to the poor. Each week, he heads to the beach to feed hundreds, but some say that public location has become a problem.
And so it's really set up to address an issue where we have some downtown parks that were being completely overwhelmed by these feedings.
Fort Lauderdale Mayor Jack Seiler landed in hot water over the law, but says he's not the bad guy.
The park almost became off limits to others in the community on days those feedings were taking place. Families were complaining to us, children were complaining to us, people that wanted to visit the library were complaining to us.
Seiler says groups are welcome to feed the homeless as long as they follow a few guidelines.
Nobody passed any ordinance that restricted the homeless access anywhere in downtown. All we said, all right, in terms of feedings going forward, there are going to be, ideally we'd like them indoors. Ideally we'd like them to have restrooms. We'd like them to have a kitchen or something, bathrooms available, clean water available. That would be the ideal situation to host these feedings.
Abbott and his supporters say those guidelines make it difficult for smaller charities. He also believes public places should be open to everyone, including homeless men, women, and children.
The beach has always been outdoors, so everybody can enjoy the beauty of it. The only people excluded are the homeless.
Florida isn't the only state to have these, quote, anti-homeless laws. These laws are actually popping up in many states across the country. According to a report from the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, anti-homeless laws have passed in more than 180 cities across the United States since 2009. Just a few hours north, Orlando restricts begging. In California, Santa Cruz bans sitting or lying down on public sidewalks. Overseas, cities have installed these anti-homeless benches to cut down on loitering and sleeping in public places. As homeless populations grow, city leaders often find themselves torn between compassion and maintaining space for the general public. To Abbott, laws like the one in Fort Lauderdale are un-American.
I fought so many years for civil rights that I'm not going to let this one go by.
He says he stared down the KKK and will take on the city and anyone else who comes between him and his religious duty.
My right to feed my brother, to make sure that the hungry get fed.
A fight he says he will continue until there is no longer breath in his body. David Brody, CBN News, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Operation Blessing is bringing joy to children at a Peruvian school this Christmas. The San Jose preschool serves about 80 children from an impoverished community. They never had enough resources for a Christmas celebration, but this year Operation Blessing and the Living Stones Ministry delighted the children with entertainment and even a special gift for each child. Operation Blessing has also been working on infrastructure and safety issues at the school and working with parents to develop micro-enterprise and livelihood projects to help them get out of poverty. You can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to their website at ob.org.
Well, folks, that's it for our edition of the newscast. I hope you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about. See you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.